Hello, and welcome to another edition of Close Mode, the Enterprise Sales Show. I'm Brian Dietmeyer, CEO of Close Strong AI, the home of precision guided selling. And today I'm legit excited to be with Adam Cuzzort of Outreach. Adam is the VP and GM of product management. He was also the co-founder and CEO of Canopy, which is now an Outreach product, two-time CTO, software engineer. Brother's got some chops. I'm really happy and excited to talk to him today. For those of you who aren't familiar with Outreach, and you should be. It's a sales execution platform where every rep can sell like your best rep, design, measure, and improve seller workflows. Adam, welcome to the dang show.
Thanks, Brian. Yeah, I'm excited to be here and talk about two of my favorite things, the intersection of sales and technology and where we're headed. So excited to dig in with you.
Yeah, and I am, for background, you and I have been kind of chatting for months about various issues, and I, like I said, I'm really, the build up to this has been great. So let's dive into it. The topic is sort of qualitative versus quantitative sales tech, and you said some stuff last week that kind of rocked my world in a good way. That we were talking about sales tech traditionally being statistical and aggregated data, but now there's a change occurring. So first, I want to talk about like that tradition. Why was there so much focus on aggregating like statistical data?
Yeah. I mean, I think it was we were working with what we had, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And because of that, there was a large emphasis on making sure that what we had was the best that it could be. So, you had a lot of folks, really this whole wave of revenue operations that spun up, and it was like, how do we optimize our CRM and what we're tracking, and then how does that lead to making better data-driven decisions in sales? And
yeah,
I think if you rewind even before that wave, you had the wave that was kind of like the storytelling, right? I have a good relationship. Maybe we closed a deal on the golf course. I took them to
right.
dinner, and while that worked, it was really hard to understand what was true and what wasn't. And in the aggregate for a large organization to sort of predict what was going to happen ultimately at the end of the quarter. And anybody that's in sales leadership, especially the CROs listening, that, predictability is paramount, whether you're a privately held company or especially a publicly held company, but really across the board, part of being a professional, well-run sales organization is being predictable. And
Yeah,
so I think that statistical thing kind of grew out of that, right? Is like, how do we manufacture predictability? How do we get a lens on it? We have to use the tools that were available. And so making sure that we had the right level of analytics and dashboards and BI that was sort of brought to bear on trying to understand what was working and what wasn't, was really, we were kind of doing the best with what we had.
it totally makes sense, and that activity was what we could measure. So you made a point last week that, quite frankly, I'm hearing more of these days. So I'm excited to talk about it. You were talking about deals being more bespoke and qualitative, more buying influences, and it's no longer a linear process. Like, can expound on that a little bit?
Yeah, I think what we've seen, especially in the last couple of years, is selling has gotten harder. It hasn't gotten easier, as we've seen more kind of the macroeconomic pressures and look like the way buyers buy has continued to evolve, and it's gotten harder and harder for sellers to navigate the way buyers want to buy and the way they need to buy.
Yep.
And so I think it's mostly due to two things that have stuck out to me in a lot of the conversations that I've had, and that is one, it's on the seller more than ever to be able to show hard value of whatever the solution or product mix that they're offering is to that specific customer, not in abstract, right? What is the value to that customer? And that requires a deep understanding of the way that customer is going to realize value. And so it's gotten harder in that sense. I think the other thing that I've seen is the buying committee, sort of the group of folks that ultimately need to sign off or in some way be influential and involved in that sale, has continued to grow. And there's new personas, right? And I know a lot of folks have been talking in the sales community over the last year about CFOs being more involved and, other business stakeholders being more involved, because at the end of the day, every organization has to get more juice from the squeeze, so to speak, right? And so because of that, it's challenged sellers to understand, how do I navigate all these different personas
Yep.
and the things that each one of these personas care about, which is oftentimes vastly different. And so it's caused, I think, to your question, what we used to see as kind of a, hey, let's build out a linear, 5 or 6 stage sales process, to become much more difficult as we bring in new, folks on the buyer side throughout the sales journey with that organization, and almost have to go backwards to go forwards again,
Yeah.
right? And do it in different ways that those folks, care about. And so navigating an opportunity cycle now doesn't look like a straight road. It's kind of a winding with some roundabouts and coming back around, right? So I think in that way, it's gotten more challenging.
Yeah, it's excuse me. When you were talking about the value, that this value point about like this, not your words, but this sort of generic value proposition versus like your value on this deal, and it brought me back, Adam, to a conversation I had with one of my partners in my old business, Hugh McDonald, and Hugh did. I don't know, 12 years and $20 billion of win-loss analysis. And Hugh, really understated guy, engineer, former VP of sales and control data, West Point grad. And we're having lunch, and he's like, "Yeah, after that work, I can pretty much tell you why winners win and why losers lose." And and then he went on to something else. And I don't know about you, but I was just like, if we're in a car, you could have heard my tires screeching from the brakes. I was like, "Back up, man!" Like, first of all, it's a great book title, but why do winners win and losers lose? And this goes back to the point you just made, I think. He said, we show customers how we meet their needs at higher confidence and lower risk than the alternative on this deal. And what struck me when he said that is that's really hard to scale. And that's what I heard you just saying, like, what is your value on this deal? And I feel like we're fundamentally changing the definition of value proposition. But now there might be technology that helps us do this at scale.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's what we're seeing now in the shifting landscape of how we can bring technology to bear to help sellers and help sales leaders and honestly help buyers navigate this whole dance, this whole journey, right? And everybody has increasing needs and complexity in that journey. And so I think first off, what we can do now better than we were able to do before, I think, is measure what's working versus not working, specific
Yeah.
to every single persona and every single organization. It used to be when we would try to say, let's measure what's working, we would be looking at, specific maybe sales methodology criteria that we met. And when that happens, we have a higher correlation to winning deals. But now it's like, well, what happens when, the CFO gets involved in the buying cycle 2/3 of the way through the deal, and what they care about is consolidation of technology stack, right? Now we know specifically how to address those specific problems, those objections, those concerns, down to like individual level, at the buyer persona level or at the organization type perspective. So, you know, it's sort of in some ways uh, a double click on things that we've already had. But I think the net difference is the fact that we're able to do this at scale, and we're
Yeah.
able to do it in a way that is much more personalized.
Well, and of course, I was going to ask you this question. I'm not going to. The enabling technology is AI, right? That's all the
Yeah.
difference now that helps us get to the kind of qualitative stuff. But I wonder what else are we going to be able to like measure, improve, and learn? What you just gave one example, but yeah, what else comes to mind for you? What are you
Yeah.
brainstorming about these days?
Yeah. I'm brainstorming a lot around things that historically, sellers want to make sure that they understand, and sales managers are always curious about. But gathering that information has been a burden on sellers. It's been difficult for sales managers to stitch that stuff together. And those are things like, how much influence do we have in this account? Where's the power? Do we know where that is, right? What about budget? And these are all things that like every seller needs to understand to effectively navigate the deal, and every sales manager needs to understand about their aggregate pipeline. But it's really hard to do, and sellers often feel like I have to do all this data entry, and there's all this admin, non-selling time, and it feels like a burden. And I think technology can really help us here in not just tracking that stuff, but measuring it and measuring the success of it. How do we measure something that is inherently difficult? Like, do we have enough influence in the account? And so I think the combination of what got us here, which is all the statistical data that we were talking about earlier, and all these new AI capabilities that are now hitting the scene in the last year or two, really start to combine to something that allows us to really up level the game and hopefully make it a lot nicer for buyers to buy and a lot easier for sellers to sell, and really
Yeah.
focus on the important things, which are what we talked about in the beginning, right? Is the hard value that customer is going to get.
Yeah, it's one of my advisors and mentors, Jim Dickey, often talks about this shift in technology going from efficiency to effectiveness. And I wonder, I'm assuming that resonates with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Because at the end of the day, it's like you can give me all the dashboards and all the stats in the world, but what I really want to know is what's working and what should I double down on and what should I stop doing, right?
Yeah,
Within my sales organization. So that effectiveness is really key, and that's what sellers want too, right? At the end of the day, that's kind of what puts money in the pocketbook. So we want to make sure that we're always investing our most precious commodity, which is time, in the right place.
yeah. Yeah, and the other thing that occurs to me too is like a lot of these. I'm not sure of the right word, but it it doesn't. The tools are working for the rep, and I think you've heard me say this before. Like reps, this is a hard point for me that I struggle with all the time. Reps are tired of filling out forms, CRM,
Yes.
sales training forms, whatever. And these are, I think, passive is the word I was looking for. That some of these are kind of passive tools, right? That the rep's just doing his or her job, and the analytics are coming back to them.
Exactly. I mean, I think the nirvana state for a seller when it comes to technology is that it becomes almost invisible, right? That I
Yeah,
go almost back to that old school way of selling where I'm just taking a prospective client to dinner or I'm, going out on the course or something and I'm having a conversation with them about why they should trust me with their business and why I think I can deliver value. And I'm not worried about all of the technology tracking of what we're saying and what the likely deal, all of that is sort of handled for me. And I can really focus on, ultimately what sellers are great at, which is building the relationship and proving the value and delivering on the trust that the customer is going to place in them. And I think that's at the end of the day, every good seller, that's what they want to do. That's what they want to focus on. And any time that they spend not doing that feels like overhead, feels like burden to them. So yeah, I think that's the nirvana state, and that's the promise I think of a lot of the new AI technology that has come out. But I think it's going to take us a little time to get to the point where it's completely transparent.
yeah,
But I think organizations that are looking to invest in this type of technology now should be thinking along those lines, right? Of how does this actually help my sellers spend more time selling and less time administering and sort of delivering the visibility and tracking and analytics internally to the organization. Sellers are no different than any other business professional in the sense that this promise of AI is to be an assistant, to be, you've heard the term co-pilot used a
yeah,
lot, I'm
yeah,
sure, right? But what does that mean for a seller? It means, that I have something that is helping me do the part of my job that I don't really like to do, or that is repetitive, or that I don't see a high value in. That's really, I think, where we're at from an AI maturity perspective. And certainly what we are investing in at Outreach is, not AI to replace sellers. It's AI to give them superpowers and take away the part of their job that is low value and give them more time back on the things that's high value.
yeah. It's interesting to me that you use that word assistant because I fed into to GPT a lot of what we do in my company, and that word came up a lot. And one of my partners bristled at that. It's like because we were using the word coach a lot, and I actually lean into the assistant. Like that's what I want as a salesperson. Like, give me an assistant that does that stuff for me. Another point you made, I've been interviewing recently. I'm trying to get like about 5 AEs who are doing the job, right? So I talked to a lot of smart guys like you who were talking about kind of strategic stuff, and it's interesting that a rep I did a podcast with recently said what you just said, that it's this is coming full circle, that a lot of the tech is allowing us to go back to the human relationship. Which was fascinating to me,
That's
the
right.
the way he put that to me, and you just said it again. So, and there's at least another person, like I'm feeling this trend now that it's like what's old is new again. That let's go back to the relationship. Let's go back to giving a damn about the human that we're talking to.
That's right. Because I think it's because that tracking, the analytical side, the sort of visibility and transparency to the organization can now be handled by AI and that assistive capability, which then frees us to go back to really what is the heart of sales, which is relationships, which is
Yeah,
trust, which is
yeah,
delivering on value, right? So, yeah, I think this hopefully, right, the sort of glass half full side of all of this new technological wave of AI is really that we get back to what sort of is at the core of selling, which is humanity and the relationships there. So
Yeah,
that's what excites me about it.
yeah, and it's sort of like I keep talking to people about EQ and the need for higher EQ in sales teams, and part of EQ is reading the room. Really, again, giving a dang about the person that I'm talking to, and we can measure that now. We can measure whatever we want to call it, empathy. That we couldn't when you talk about qualitative stuff. Like that's the way to scale EQ. Like, hey, you're not really listening well enough, that kind of thing, or the customer's reaction in the XYZ kind of way.
Yeah, yeah, and I think everyone, regardless of the job that they're doing, wants that sort of always on assistant to sort of fill in the gaps for things they might have missed, right? I mean, I would love if I just had an assistant that's always taking notes, like on my entire life, and I could just turn to it and go like, "What did I tell that person last week about that topic?" Right? And so this is kind of the promise, right, of AI, and I think where it can add a lot of value. And as we think about how that gets applied to sales organizations, another thing I think that's really important, and I think where we should be placing a lot of investment and emphasis from a technology perspective is kind of the now what aspect
Mm.
for sellers, right? As selling's gotten harder and we have new buying personas coming into the mix and sales cycles are elongating and getting more complex, reps need that assistant at their fingertips that's just helping them with like the now what, like what is the next step, how do I move this deal forward. And I think that's what I love about some of what you all are doing at Close Strong and really thinking about coaching in a new light. It's how do we do this just in time in a way that's completely bespoke to like this particular deal and this particular seller. And that's really, I think, the power of an assistive capability for sellers is like that voice on your shoulder that's always there going like, hey, remember last week when you mentioned this as the next step to connect to this new persona, that it's kind of nudging us and helping us with that now what should we go do. It's a productivity superpower that every business person I think wants, regardless of their role, but especially sellers, need this. We're all time constrained, and time is money in sales. So that's really where I think technology is moving, and smart organizations should be focusing on and investing in.
Yeah. You made a point last week that made this all come alive for me. You said we're moving from how many conversations happened to what happened on that conversation. And there's so many other areas too where we can make that
That's
transition, I
right.
feel. Yeah, I
That's right.
also go please go ahead.
No, I just really the ability to combine those things, right? Is like it's not just about the volume; it's about the quality, and then what were the topics being discussed by which personas, right? There's always this nuance that's really hard to track in something like a CRM, where it's there were five people on the call and three people were positive, but we had a strong detractor on there, and this is what they were detracting and cared about, and how do we overcome that? And there's so much nuance, and I think the ability to combine positive and negative sentiment and then like formulate a strategy, formulate a play, how do we move past that, that's really what the heart of good sales coaching and good sales leadership is, right? The best sales managers that I talk to that sit down with their reps on a regular basis are working through those kind of conversations. And
Yeah.
so I think the more we can speed the time to delivering that insight to the seller themselves and to their manager, the better.
Yeah, it's there. Another thing that I'm curious. There's a book written by Harvard guy Danny Ertl about connecting sort of strategy to tactics at the sales level, right? So there's part of our corporate strategy that we're executing one deal at a time, not all of it, not M&A work and that kind of thing, but and there's always been a frustration. Industry analyst Jim Dickey, a lot of people know, say companies are frustrated. They have this new strategy, they roll it out at SKO, and then everyone goes back and sells the old thing. And I, in my previous company, we did billions of dollars in human coaching, and what my human coaches couldn't do is have the strategy of the organization in their brain to say, all right, you're in this vertical selling this solution against this competitor. We could ask all the questions to de-risk the deal and find out what data is missing. But moving from deal to deal, solution to solution, AI's got that capability. And to me, this is something that I don't hear talked about enough is connecting, feeding that strategy into the brain of the AI.
Yeah.
So we do make that connection. And I'm curious about your thoughts on that.
Well, I think this is really at the heart of the biggest challenge in building sales technology over the last couple decades, right? Was that as we've matured it, what we've done is we've tried to make the technology sort of agnostic to the business. If you look at CRMs now, they're basically just a big database with a bunch of integrations. And so we've tried to cover more organizations and more different use cases, but we've in doing so really kind of gone down to a lowest common denominator solution. And so I think the hardest thing in sales has always been to add enough value on the technology front, but in a way that actually adds the same level of value for every customer, regardless of the industry or the product mix or how they sell. And so I think, as you said, being able to sort of understand the strategy of the organization and then distill that down into like actionable intelligence that gets delivered to every layer of the sales organization and the seller that's just about 5 minutes from joining a call on that deal that they're trying to close. That is a huge leap forward in how we've been
Yeah.
able to operate in the past. My,
Yeah.
my job as a technical and product leader in a sales technology organization has always been create a solution that works for everyone. And that is really difficult in a way that's like opinionated and works the way that that specific customer wants to work, because there's so much variety in the way that sales organizations run and how they sell and their processes and tools. And so, yeah, that's a really exciting, I think we're at kind of an inflection point with this unlock of new AI technology and just how bespoke we can make that, just in time insight.
Yeah. I feel like a lot of the AI tools super valuable. Listen to the call and tell you what happened, and that's again getting us to that qualitative stuff. And in this point that we're talking about now, it's the proactive piece before the call, where the AI is smart enough to say this is how we're competing in this environment. This is our strategy. We're rolling out this new product, or we want to switch to this new bundle. And how are we using it proactively? And we're playing with some of this where it's really fun to make the tool smart about proactively about our strategy and where we're going. And then we can measure how well we're executing that after the fact. And I feel like getting both sides of that coin is super valuable.
Yeah, and I talk to sellers, and there's different reactions to this depending on who you talk to, in the sense that um, a seller that is relatively early on in their career, that's learning kind of how do I be like the number one enterprise segment seller, right? How do I get that level of success in OTE basically at the end of the quarter? They're all about like, yes, give me all of these tools, give me all the coaching, give me all the insight, prep me for that meeting, Brian, please,
Yeah.
and then I go talk to like some of the more tenured sellers that have been doing this for decades. And sometimes I get the response from them like, oh, I already know. I already know the strategy. I've picked up on that, right? I've been doing this for 30 years. But I think the unlock moment, even for those folks, is that, yes, but when you have this always on assistant, think of how much time that's going to save you, and remove the blind spots that you may have already had,
Yeah.
but not known about. And so
Yeah.
those might be things like, hey, a new product offering that your company's bringing in, or new competition that you're seeing in the market that everyone always has to stay up to date with. And so there are things about sales that are kind of unchanging, and a lot of that is sort of like how to build trust, how to build champions within an organization. And then there are things that are changing all the time, like the shifting market landscapes and competition and new product offerings and acquisitions. And so even experienced sellers often can use and get a lot of value from this kind of always on assistive capability that's raising this to their attention.
Yeah, and I do think it's funny. I did a podcast with a CRO who said, "Look, 2024, we're 2x pipe versus 6x," and so she was saying, "Look, for success this year, it's the middle of your pipe and it's the middle of your sales team. It's not forget the C players; they're probably never going to get there. A players might be rocking it, and you're right. At the margins, we can deliver them some stuff, but it really resonated when she talked to me about the middle of the pipe and the middle of your players, and then also onboarding. Right, you kind of just skirted around this, but the new reps, how do we put best practice in front of them right now on day one, like actual best practice? And I feel like that's yeah, it's the new reps, it's the B players, it's the middle of
Yeah.
your pipe, it's all these areas that we can make an impact on in 2024.
You're right. I mean, we at Canopy, actually, when we first started, we one of the things that we identified early on was that if we could model out what the best sales reps ramp time looked like, and what the milestones were that they achieved during that ramp, right, as they're onboarding and learning, that we could sort of build a model for what that optimal ramp cycle looks like for an organization, and then deliver that to sales leaders so they could, build all of their training and onboarding plans to match that ideal ramp profile. But in some ways, that's still kind of just reading the news, right? It's kind of like, this is what happened and this is how you should think about it in the future, but it's not really guided. It's not really sort of prescriptive and specific to that organization in the sense of, we saw sort of the time to first deal and kind of the amount of attainment that ramping rep got, but we didn't know the sort of intangible factors, right? What were they doing that no one else was doing? What were they particularly good at, maybe from a soft skill perspective, that other reps that were ramping weren't? And so I think we're entering this ability to really be much more specific and bespoke around analyzing what made that ramp better, faster, more effective than another cohort of reps that we ramped, and then start to model that in a much more guided way. Because
Yeah.
yeah, you're right. If we can shorten the time that it takes to onboard and ramp new reps, huge impact for the organization.
Yeah, and I think you take me with your thoughts. You take me to a really tactical place. Like, let's say qualifying, for example. As we were building our new business, we interviewed about 60 execs, and we're like, "What are your frustrations with pipeline and et cetera, forecast accuracy?" And one of the things we heard is, "I'm so frustrated that I get called in to close these deals, and these pieces of trash were not even qualified in the first place." So, like,
Right.
if we take this conceptual stuff we're talking about and saying, "Okay, what are the reps? What are the best reps doing? What qualification criteria do they have that drives win rate, that drives deal optimization, and drives renewals?" We can collect that and get that in front of the new reps to say, if you want to move those three metrics, run through this. And that's where I start seeing like really street level impact.
Yeah, exactly right. And a lot of this has to do with the fidelity of the data that we're getting. And again, like historically, it was really what those reps are doing on the CRM records. And nowadays, we're able to collect so much more data around what's happening, what's being discussed through various communication channels, whether that's a live meeting or whether that's an email or a LinkedIn message or whatever it is. We're able to really gather those insights and I think deliver those much more effectively. Because really, since I started in sales technology, most of the sales leaders I would talk to would say, I want the correlation analysis. Like, what are my best reps doing that my other reps are not doing? How do I make that sort of middle 50% look like that top 25%, to
Yes.
your point?
Yeah.
And so, but a lot of the time, from as a technologist, I was limited in how I could deliver that because I was limited by the data. And so now we have so much more data at our
Yeah.
disposal to start to draw these correlations between
Yeah.
what's working and what's not.
Well, and the data was limited by the tools, right? So now
Exactly.
we have a new tool, and I think there was a lot of critical articles about when is AI going to become really helpful for reps, and I feel like even before talking to you that we're starting to get there now. We're really it was this really big, fun, sexy thing, but we're now figuring out how to get it granular down to that, like, again, qualification level or discovery level, to say, hey, we can go to a stage in the sales process and a skill and give you really cool insight about that.
Yeah, that's right. And to a large extent, this is great for reps because it allows them to a large extent sort of self-manage, right? To look at all of my deals, look at the qualification state of them and go, you know, are they all the way that I think they should be before I go into that one-on-one with my manager, before I go into the next meeting with the customer? Like, am I saying the right things? Again, like, even the best, you use like a sports analogy, the best athletes in the world still need coaches, right? Because they need
Yeah.
somebody that's kind of looking out for the big picture, double checking what they're doing. Oftentimes you have great individual contributors that are excellent at doing their job, maybe the full sales funnel, maybe they're really good at qualifying, maybe they're really good at negotiation and value, but they still need somebody kind of doing that double check for them, going like, did you remember to ask about this? And I think that's the again, like, we are entering this era for sellers where they really can get this, and they can, to a certain extent, kind of self-manage and self-coach, which is really powerful, right, for them and for their leaders, because that means their managers get more time back to ask even better, deeper questions, not the sort of like fundamental stuff.
Yeah. So yeah, two kind of issues. We could go for an hour here, but we won't. But two issues. One is the manager time issue, which we haven't even gotten into.
That's
Like
right.
we know 5% of the pipe is coached, but managers don't have time. This allows us. But something you just said. This is sort of to me a complete fundamental rethinking of enablement. Right, about the way we used to do it, the
Yes.
data we used to have, and again, I would go back to enablement and strategy execution. Like we have a whole different methodology and approach to be able to execute it and measure it, and it's a really exciting time to be in this space. It's moving pretty quick.
I think so. I mean, enablement is a broad term within the sort of sales ecosystem landscape, but at the end of the day, it's, how do we make our sellers as productive as possible? And I do think you're right that the landscape of how that gets done is changing very rapidly. Historically it's been, we need to produce a lot of content and education material for them to consume and then make sure that they do that every. I think the way that it's really moving is it looks a lot more like deal strategy. It looks a lot more like the
Yeah,
conversation that really good sales managers have with their reps when they go, what play should we run to move this deal forward? What are the critical inflection points of this opportunity that we need to focus on? And whether it's a seasoned seller or a brand new one, I think that's the most effective way to enable, right? And when I
yeah,
talk to sellers, I'm like, what's the best enablement you feel like you've ever gotten in your life? And it was always centered around some deal they were trying to close. I
yeah.
had this big deal and I couldn't figure out how to move it forward. And my manager just unlocked this light bulb moment for me. Right. And it's always in the context of, doing their job, closing a deal. It's not a abstract, let me go take a training course kind of thing. So, yeah, I think the landscape of that whole method for how we make sellers more productive is evolving very rapidly.
Right. Well, some of that coaching was interrogation. You and I have talked about this in the past,
Mm,
and we've also talked about the difference between sort of skills coaching and deal coaching. And I think you nailed it. It's like those are different. And I'm just realizing that over the
yes.
last 6 months that people kind of lump coaching all into one thing, and it's very different set of skills, very different. It's not interrogation. It's help me strategize, help me get over this hurdle, and I think we're getting there with these technologies. And I know I
That's
said
right.
this to you at the outset before we started recording. I know you're slammed. You've been super generous with your time and your ideas, and I'm really looking forward to people who don't have these kind of this qualitative AI leverage in their head today. That hopefully we've gone some way toward getting there. So again, thank you so much for your time.
Of course, yeah, I love the topic, and hopefully, folks, get inspired by this to go and investigate, how they start to deliver some of these capabilities to their sellers, because I think they are really eager for it, and I think there's massive lift to the value of the organization. Think about like what the incremental gain is of making that much more, that middle percent that you talked about around the sort of middle of your deals, middle of your sellers, that much more productive and effective.
Yeah,
Huge return, worth the investment, worth the time. And I think we've got, technology landscape that is now really offering a ton of value. So it's
I
been fun talking about it, Brian. Thanks for having me.
you're welcome. Thank you.